Hello everyone! In this video, I'll give you an introduction to ArcGIS Pro, perhaps the world's most popular commercial geographic information systems or GIS software. Whether you're a beginner or an existing GIS user, if you want to learn more about what ArcGIS Pro is, then this video is for you. ArcGIS Pro is one of the world's leading commercial geographic information systems or GIS software packages. It is the flagship software product from the company ESRI or Esri. I've been using Esri GIS software for over 20 years, and I've seen their software evolve in many different directions. I can personally attest to the power of ArcGIS Pro as I use it extensively in my teaching and research. In this video, I want to give you a demonstration of some of the key features of ArcGIS Pro. However, one relatively short video can't cover all the aspects of this exciting software package. Therefore, I'm primarily going to focus on some of the key features you should be aware of as you begin to learn ArcGIS Pro in detail. Additionally, for further explanation of some of the GIS concepts discussed in this video, check out other videos on this channel. Furthermore, links to the software and datasets I use are also available in the descriptions below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share this video, or consider subscribing to this channel. All right, let's go check out ArcGIS Pro. Hello, and welcome to this video that's a tour of the ArcGIS Pro GIS software environment. The learning objectives for this video are to understand the basic features of ArcGIS Pro that include logging in, core software interface elements, data management, data display and symbology, selections and querying, geoprocessing tools, layouts and map making, Python and models, and special topics that include 3D, animation, and networks. This video will be purely hands-on, so I'll go right into the software demonstration of ArcGIS Pro so you can begin to see what's possible with the software. As a reminder, this will be a high-level demonstration of the features of ArcGIS Pro to show you what's possible with this software. I'll use datasets from Monroe County, New York, USA for the demonstration. These datasets are available for download from my website. A link to these datasets can be found in the description below. All right, and welcome to this demo of ArcGIS Pro. And like I said in the beginning, this is meant to be a high-level, just tour and introduction of ArcGIS Pro. It's a very complicated software environment, especially if you've never seen it before. And I'm going to show you a lot of things that are possible with the software, and I'm not going to really go too deep into any one of those. I'll save those for other videos. But one of the very basic things you need to know about ArcGIS Pro is that it's very much tied in with Esri's ArcGIS Online, which is a whole other topic in itself. So I've particularly configured my environment to not be logged in, just to show you what that's like. And also for some of my students out there, this is how you begin working with the software. So if you've just installed it and you need to log in, you might be faced with a screen like this. And so typically the way it works is if you were to click here, you put in the name of your, what they would call your enterprise login or your ArcGIS login, if that's the way you do it. Now at my university, that's what you put in there. And then when I hit, notice it fills the rest of it in. When I hit continue, so I work for a place called the Rochester Institute of Technology. So this is a good sign. It's starting to find where I am. And if you're a college student in the United States in particular, you may have a similar way that you access the software. So I'm going to log in what they call an enterprise login, and you can see the stuff from my university coming up. And I'm logging in with the same account that I would use if I was at my university checking my email or something. And that's the idea of what they call the enterprise account. It's tied in with the login of where your home institution is. So let me go ahead and log in. And of course, I need to have an internet connection to do this. There are ways that you can get ArcGIS Pro to work offline, which I do sometimes when I'm traveling internationally. And this is what the startup screen looks like. Now, just for thoroughness, if I were to sign myself back out, you can see that I'm getting prompted about that. If you come to the software and it looks like this, you can do the same thing I just did, but go up here, go to sign in, and it remembers mine from my home institution RIT, but just for thoroughness, you could be in a public computer lab, you might have a different organization, you could be visiting somewhere. So that's how you would do that part. And, of course, remember the URL, and I'm basically doing the steps over again. And there we go. So now I'm connected. So now I've got ArcGIS Pro started. I've got my home institution. There's my name and so forth. So to get started, the fundamental project file of ArcGIS Pro is a map. And so I'm going to use one of the templates. I'm going to create a map template, and I'm going to store it in an easy to find directory. I like to use ctemp. In fact, you have to pick the folder and give it a name. And I will not create a new folder for this project, so I'll just do that. Now, let's go take a look behind the scenes of what's happening even by doing that. I'll come back to this in just a moment. Here's the software, but if I look at my ctemp directory, here is the APRX, the project file. It creates a database for you and some other background stuff. And in just a moment, I'll get to this, the data sets that were part of this, that I provided for this lesson. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the core software interface elements. This is, of course, your map. And you can see by using the map template, I got an automatic, what they call a base map. And right off the bat, if I hold my left button down on Windows, I can hold that button down over the map. I can pan it around. I can use a mouse wheel to zoom in and out. And ArcGIS Pro is kind of nice with these base maps. They get you up and running with just something to look at to start off. Most of my demo is going to be in this place called Rochester, New York. That's where I live. And so that's what I'm going to use for my other examples. Let's take a look up here. ArcGIS Pro uses all the sort of modern Windows interface elements, tabs and ribbons and so forth. So if I click on the one that says map, right now I'm on the Explore tool. You can see how you get some sort of visual help and so forth. And this is where you can do other, if you've used ArcGIS, the older software, you'll find a lot of elements that are similar, like a fixed zoom in, a fixed zoom out, and so forth. You have back and forth with different views using these buttons and so forth. You can also, of course, change the base map, and that's kind of a cool thing about ArcGIS Pro. If you click here, you'll see a whole bunch of different kinds of base maps they give you. I use OpenStreetMap a lot in other videos, especially when I do open source GIS, and there it is, the OpenStreetMap base map that they've included into ArcGIS Pro. And these can be helpful. I'm going to do other videos about digitizing where I'm going to use the imagery layer, and you get stuff for free. It's a pretty good, not bad image and so forth. Okay. So throughout the video, you're going to see how the workflow of working with this software, when you are on a certain data layer or you're doing something, that the submenus that come up when you click on the tabs are going to be kind of important. Now, another really fundamental part of ArcGIS Pro is what they call the table of contents, and that's over here. Right now, I have one layer inside of my table of contents. That's the world imagery base map. And like a lot of other GIS software, if I uncheck that, that'll toggle the visibility of the layers and so forth. I have different ways I can look at my data with these buttons and so forth. And another important thing is to go over the properties of the map itself. If I were to go where it says map and I right click and go to properties, you'll see general things about the map that you might need to know about. One that's important is the coordinate system and so forth. So the very first layer that gets added to the map defines the coordinate system. In this video, I'm not going to really talk about details of things what are called coordinate systems, map projections. I have a whole nother video that I'll put a link to that you can find out about those things. But just to make you aware of the things about the map itself. And the map contains all of the different data layers. All right, let's start looking at some data. GIS is fundamentally driven by data, so I'm going to show you how to access the demo data sets for this video, and it's a good old-fashioned zip file. So I've downloaded that zip file from my website into my ctemp directory, and I'll use a handy tool called 7-zip that I have right on my system. I'm going to right-click on that zip file, 7-zip, and I'm going to extract it to the ArcGIS Pro Tour datasets. Okay, and we'll just take a quick peek inside of there from the Windows system perspective. Now, if you're new to GIS, this may look kind of intimidating. Basically, what you have in here are a bunch of shape files, a CSV file, network datasets. For this video, I really tried to compile a wide range of different types of data that you might encounter working with ArcGIS Pro. And let's go look at these now using ArcGIS Pro. And I should also mention that my software in this video might look different than your software. So what you want to find is what's called the catalog view. And if you can't find it, if you go here under View, Catalog View, that's there. And there's also the catalog pane. That's what this thing is. And I should mention too, like a lot of modern Windows tools, if I were to hold my button down there, I can drag and reposition the windows and so forth. And again, if you're an old ArcGIS user, ArcView really didn't do these kind of things. That was a big update for ArcGIS Pro. Now, from this, you can think of this as kind of like my Windows Explorer. If I go down here, I'm going to look under Folders, and you can see the little house icon, ctemp. That means that's the home directory of my project. And if I expand that out, okay, because of the way I structured it, the demo data sets I gave you for this video are right here. And if I expand that folder out, you get a much different view than as if you were looking at Windows Explorer. And that's the real power of Arc. I guess they still call it Arc Catalog. And this is your lifesaver for working with your data. What do you have? What kind of data is it? So to go over some of this real quick, you've got shape files, vector data, and you can tell by their icon, a wetland, this one's a polygon, the roads, that's a line, and this is what's called a file geodatabase. This is an Esri proprietary data format. If you expand that and look inside there, you have other what they call feature classes. Here's one of buildings, and then this is what they call a featured data set, and inside that featured data set is a point feature class of place names. And again, I'm not going into details about and again, I'm not going to go into details about how to create these things or technical details about them. This is meant to be a tour of ArcGIS Pro, but I'll have other videos you can watch about how you build these things and so forth. Now, like most software, there's several ways you can accomplish tasks. If you want to add data into the map now, you can go up here to Map and add data and all kinds of different kinds of data. But I find the easiest way I like to do it, especially if I have it in my folders, is kind of drag and drop it over there. So let's start adding some of this data in so I can show you more things. So I'm going to hold my left button down, drag and release. And here comes census tracts, and you can see how the map zoomed out. Here come the major roads that I'll use as an example. These represent sort of highways and bigger roads in this county in this case study. Here come the more detailed roads and so forth. Now, like other GIS software, the level of drawing is determined by where things are fitting in the table of contents. So right now the census tracts are on the bottom. If I were to bring them up, you can see how they kind of cover everything up. And so typically what you do is you put your polygons and your images kind of at the bottom of the drawing stack, and you can toggle their visibility with the checkboxes. I also have a raster data set in here. You can see kind of by the grid of pixels that it's showing. and that's a DEM file, or a digital elevation model. I'll put that in there. And yes, typically you can build pyramids. That'll help with the drawing of a raster data. And I like to joke, this is the drink a coffee moment when these kind of things happen, because you got to wait a minute. And I'm going to adjust the position of the DEM just so you can see it a little better, and so forth. Should also mention some other things here. I also have what's called the CSV file, comma separated values. Now, ArcGIS Pro can handle non-spatial data files, and CSV, what I'm going to show you in a minute is a real quick table join. I'll bring that over and bring that into my map. And you can see how it's called it a standalone table. It's kind of got its own spot within the map here. And if I were to right click on it and do open, you can see here it's just a straight table, kind of like you can think of it kind of like a table in a spreadsheet. And in just a moment, we'll do I'll give you a quick demonstration of what's called a table join, where I'll join these this table onto the census tracts to see how so you can see how that looks. Okay, so we've added a bunch of data into the map. Oh, by the way, same thing too with the file geodatabase. You can drag feature classes right out of there. And with that, we can now, let's do some symbology to show you how you can change the display of things. Let's turn a few things off. The map gets really busy when you start adding a lot of things in. By the way, always save your work. It's always a good habit no matter what software you're using. I'll even turn the imagery off. So with let's start with those place names. Okay. What these are, they come from the U.S. Geological Survey, and they are basically just place names that were derived from topographic maps. Now, with vector GIS data, of course, you have attributes. So I have a point vector. If I right click on that layer and go to attribute table, I can find out things about what's in here. And you can see I have ponds and creeks. And I have what's called a feature class designation of what the thing actually is. Is it a park, a populated place, a school, and so forth. ArcGIS Pro has gotten way better with cartography and map making. So for a quick demonstration of that, let's say I wanted to make each symbol in this point layer its own unique size, shape, or color, depending on how you want to do it, based on the value of feature class, feature CL. So if I were to right click and go to Symbology, you can see here now how I get my choices for how I want to do this. Currently, by default, I have a single symbol, but if I drop this down, I might want to do unique values based on the field feature CL. And you can see here how it puts all the different unique values in. If you're a database person, this might be a select distinct query. So distinct values, airports, bars, basins, bridges, and so forth. Now, this is where you could spend a lot of time going through and fixing this. By default, it's giving me just a color representation, but I might want to use, let's try an airport as a good example. If I click on that, I could type in airport under my symbol search, and I can find a symbol that I might like, and so forth. If I zoom the map out a little bit, there's a couple airports here. Okay. Again, quick demonstration. There's a lot more you could do now with changing the sizing of those symbols and so forth. But again, just trying to show you what's possible here with that. You might call that a qualitative cartographic representation technique. I know that might sound very lofty, but basically there's non-numerical data and I'm giving it a different kind of symbol based on what it is. Okay. Let's look at the another example of symbology, this time with quantitative data. If I go to the Monroe County census tracts, if you're not from the United States, basically a census tract is a polygon spatial unit that has population characteristics. So if I were to right click and go to the attribute table for this layer, you can see that I have things like population, the percentage of white people, black people, and so forth. And most countries run a census, right? What is the population characteristics of where you live? And that's what these represent. It's a little hard to see right now, but if I were to go to Symbology for census tracts, it's already open, but just to be refreshed, I'm going to right click, go to Symbology. Instead of a single symbol, now I'm going to use graduated colors, draw quantities. And that's kind of a nice thing about ArcGIS Pro is they give you a lot of help, especially with cartographic concepts. If you watch my other video on core concepts for GIS, I talk about cartography. And from behind the scenes, I know that when they were building ArcGIS Pro, they really had a lot of cartographers get involved in the software. So it creates a really nice sort of, you might call it a user experience of map making. So especially with some help. So graduated colors. And let's say I just want to make a graduated color map of population in Monroe County. So my field is going to be POP 2010. And you can see here, I have got my different methods. This is a whole nother big topic in itself, but you can see they give you the visual help, how you are creating the data classification bins of your data, quantiles, equal intervals, and so forth. Natural breaks is a real popular one, and so forth. You even can do normalization, which means that you try to show things on a sort of equal scale, and so forth. You have that there. I'm just going to use raw counts for now. And that's what you get. And so it's pretty easy to do. However, just be careful. I clicked a lot of buttons kind of quickly and I threw a map together. Make sure you understand what you've selected, your methods. You know, if you switch it from natural breaks to equal interval, you know, you can get a different change. It wasn't that visually different in this example, but it can be depending on the data and its range and so forth. And again, really big topic. I have videos on cartography that cover that topic. Okay, let's next look at symbolizing a raster, and I'll go look a little closer at this DEM, digital elevation model, and I'll close a few windows just to make it a little bigger here in the screen. And basically with a raster, you get the ability to define how you want to render it based on the pixel values. So stretch the values along a color ramp, right? So with this one, for showing elevation, which is what this is based on, a popular one to use for this might be something like that. Okay, so you can see these are values in metric. So every individual pixel, if I click on it, it gives me the identify tool. Where I click, the value is 170, so 170 meters above sea level. And this particular area is not actually very, terrain-wise isn't very interesting, but it kind of looks cool even with this, the higher values. And where this is what's called the Genesee River, you can see how the DEM is capturing the shape of a river that has kind of a basin. You get this kind of thing that kind of snakes itself along, okay? So again, with symbology of rasters, you get a lot of different options depending on how you want to do it. You could even classify it. Again, it's kind of numerical data. Like I just showed you with census tracts, you can classify it into data bins and so forth. You get a whole different view just based on the symbology method that you choose. So it's good. Remember, it's important to understand what those methods are doing when you apply them, so you're making a map that people will understand and not mislead them. All right, let me show you a little bit now about selections and querying, another fundamental part of ArcGIS Pro. And with that, I'm going to bring another data layer in that I didn't bring in before, and that's the wetlands. And you can do a quick change of the symbol if you click on it. Let's make it for a wetland. There we go. Let's make it a water. The connotation of blue. And let's say I'm doing an environmental analysis and I'm looking at these wetlands and I want to find all of the wetlands that are of class 1. And I'm not an environmental scientist, but my understanding of class 1 wetlands, these are standalone wetlands. And in the United States, wetlands have protection from the government and so forth. So it's really important that these things are documented and so forth. So one way I can do a basic query is go up here. And if it's not here, you would go under the Map tab, select by attributes. And I can build up a query statement by doing a new selection, new expression where class is equal to, and it'll give you for free some of the values and so forth. Now you can also look at the SQL view if that's what you prefer. This one's pretty basic. It's just a simple, pretty simple one. You can validate it, and when I run it, watch what'll happen over here. Right now it says 0 of 609 selected. When I run it, 164 of 609, and you can see how in my map they're kind of highlighted in black. Yours might look different depending on your settings, but that's a basic query. And that's a really fundamental and powerful aspect of ArcGIS Pro, is using a select by attribute query. Now I can go here, I can clear my selection. I have other ways, of course, I can select things. I can use a shape, like a polygon. Let's say I want to select just these things that I'm drawing a polygon around. I double click, and you can see how they get selected. I can go down here and switch to the selected record, so I'm looking at just those, and so forth. And by the way, too, sometimes you might find a data set like this, and there might be very strange headings or values. If you're lucky, you'll have a metadata file, and I included one of those with these data sets, the Monroe County Wetlands metadata, and it's in an XML format. And if I right-click from Catalog and go View Metadata, and this can be a little clunky to view. I like to pull the window out, just make it its own thing. Click here, it gives me the documentation or metadata about this data layer and so forth. And all of these data sets are published by the US government, so they're required by law to comply with what's called the Federal Geographic Data Commission, and there's a certain structure to the metadata that comes with it. Now, you won't always find metadata this good, but I just wanted to point it out as you're learning about ArcGIS Pro and how the software environment works in terms of metadata. So I'll close that. Okay, let me show you a basic table join now. And for that, let me set this up. I'm going to go back to those census tracts where we did a population before, and I'll change its symbology back to a single symbol. I'll just make it something simple like that. Now, a really core part of GIS software is the ability to join tables together, and that was also in my core concepts video, so I'm not going to really go over it too much. I'll provide a link to it, but if you look, I've got the various shapes, and I've got their attributes as per vector data, and I've got some data on gender and race. However, in my CSV file that I showed you earlier, if I were to open that up, I've got other data. I've got age data. I've got age ranges from 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and so forth, and household sizes and other things. And this is very, very common. You'll often have a reference data set like census tracts, and then you'll go to something like the U.S. Census Department website, and you'll download additional attribute data that you join onto a reference data set. And so in preparing these demo data sets, I wanted to show you that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my left button down. I'll put that table there. So I'm looking at the two tables side by side now, and you can see that FIPS, which is the federal identifier for the census tract, and I have the same record or same column over here, and that's the two columns I will use to join together. Let's say I want to do a study on elderly populations in Monroe County, and I don't have that in my current table. I went and downloaded it, and now I'm going to do the table join. And so to do a table join, it's pretty easy. If you've got all the data sets working out, I'm going to first clear my selection. And like a lot of things in ArcGIS Pro, they're going to be accessed through right clicks. So I'm going to right click on Monroe County census tracts, and I'm going to select joins and relates. I'm going to add a join. And as you've seen now in this demo, a lot of things are happening sort of on the right-hand side here with all these various tabs. And in just a moment, I'll talk to you about geoprocessing. And it tries to even help you with the join. So it's finding the FIPS field, it found the CSV, and it found these. Now, of course, if that wasn't the field I wanted, I could click the drop down and so forth, but this is basically just defining the two fields in common between the two tables. So I hit the run button. Okay, you can even see it update. So when I did that, now I've got the join table. Before there was just this one, now I've got this other one, and I've got all those other attributes from the CSV have now been joined onto my polygon vector file of census tracts. And with that join in place, I can now right click, go back to Symbology, and symbolize this layer using my newly acquired attributes through the join. So like I said, if I was doing a study of elderly people, see how all those fields are now available in there. And that's going to be a really powerful thing for you to do, is to join other data in. And so that's why I thought it was really important to mention in this kind of tour of ArcGIS Pro. Okay, let's do a tour now of the basics of geoprocessing. And a lot of your geoprocessing tools are going to come up from here under analysis. And one way that I like to do it is click here under where it says tools, and you get some of the favorite tools are here. And if you're an ArcGIS Pro user, you might remember the toolboxes. Those are still here. These toolboxes give you the metaphor of a toolbox, right? So here's your hammer, your saw, and so forth. And you can spend a lot of time drilling through all of these, anywhere from spatial statistics tools, space-time mining tools. Frankly, I don't really even use many of these tools. I don't think a lot of people do. You remember that ArcGIS Pro is a professional commercial GIS software. It's been going for over 40 years. They've built a lot of stuff into it over the years that some people still use. One way I like to do it too is just type the name of the command in. So I'll show you buffer, and that's how I get to that. So let's say I want to do a buffer. And that found it in the toolbox. Another way I could do it here is just straight up, if I wasn't in the toolboxes, is just search for it. And you'll get this sort of a search results. And I click on that. Clicking on that takes me to the toolboxes. Clicking here, though, takes me to the command, and that's how I can access them. Buffer is always a good, easy example to use. So if I did a quick buffer of the major roads, these pink things, and I'll make it a 500 feet. I'll zoom it in to set this up. So I have this pink line, I let it run, and so forth. And just make note of this for this tour, the inputs and outputs. You get a default geodatabase to handle your outputs. And so I'll go and run it. Okay. You can see these kind of interesting kind of blue circles that are the buffer. Each of those are 500 feet. If I want to make it a little more visible where they came from, again, I can click on that and so forth. I can go back and so forth. Down here is my geoprocessing thing I just did. Now, the reason I didn't do that was because I did no dissolve. If I hit that, I'll change the name of my file to D for dissolve, and I'll run that. Okay, colors kind of came out the same, but you can see now how I have one sort of clean shape as opposed to because I didn't throw the dissolve sort of switch in that command. And in just a moment, I'll show you Python programming, and that's going to be very important, all the different, what you call them, parameters when you run a geoprocessing command. But again, just to review that, you can get at your geoprocessing tools through the Tools menu. Take a look through the toolbox if you're new to working with ArcGIS Pro. If you're coming over from ArcMap, it's still there. I typically nowadays like to just use the search to find things, but it just depends on your workflow and your style. All right, let me just show you quickly too how you can make a map. Now let's say I'm going to make a map of my census tracts. And I can do a lot of handy things like right click and do zoom to layer and so forth. So to make a map, I'm going to go under Insert, and like I said, things will show up when you click on the various tabs. I'm going to do New Layout, and right off the bat, it's going to prompt me for the size of the paper I want, and so forth. And so you can see how it kind of looks like a piece of paper. It's its own interface element now. And again, this is another big topic, but the way that you make a map is you go Map Frame, and you pick from your various maps you have. So here's what I had earlier, and I'm drawing that out. Okay, and now here's in my layout, the map frame itself. It's kind of like a table of contents, but it's for the layout. The really old-fashioned term is to call this paper space, which I think is still a good way to call it, but here's all your classic map elements, like a north arrow, a scale bar, and so forth. Again, this is a high-level tour just to show you about map making. There's a lot of different options here with graphics, exporting it, and so forth. And that's how you would get started with making a map layout. All right, let me show you the basics of some Python programming now. For a long time, ArcGIS Pro has used Python as its customization language. All the Esri tools over the years have used different languages. A long time ago, it was a language called Avenue, then it was Visual Basic, but they've stuck with Python now for a while, which I think is really great because there's a lot of other software out there, data science and so forth, that uses Python. And to do a basic Python command, what you can do here is go under where it says Analysis, and here's your Python. You can see it's like an old DOS prompt. This brings up down here the Python command line, and if you look down here, this is where you can, this is sort of your most basic entry point into the world, what they call ArcPy. It's the Python library used by ArcGIS Pro. And let me show you a real quick example of a simple ArcPy statement. And let me set this up. I'll turn a few layers. I'll use the major roads again because they're good for this kind of example, right? And I'll zoom in on it. So down here, I'm gonna, so again, I was Python. You can see the cursor flash, good old-fashioned command line. So if I start typing in ARC, you can see ArcPy comes up, dot, and then BUFF, buffer. I want buffer analysis. Okay, now what it's doing now is it's looking in my table of contents, and it's finding the different parameters to put into the command. So when I showed you it in the GUI, the graphical user interface, I had to pick an input feature class, and I had to define an output. So before, I did the major roads was the input, and I was going to ask for a buffer of 500 feet, and it had to create a new file of that buffer. So that's basically the same process, but I'm doing it all now in command line. So I'll pick the major roads, and if I hit comma, watch what'll happen with, it's working me through the command right now. So I got to give it a name. I'll call it a string. I'll call it buff test. You have to type in a string here, 500 feet. And if you look, those are all the required parameters, meaning I have to tell it to those three things. Everything else is optional. So I'll leave it for that, just for this quick demo. And I'll hit the enter, and you can see it start to work. And there it is. So there's a real simple, but it worked, ArcPy Python command to create a buffer. And there's my file buff test and so forth. It saved it in my geodatabase that's associated with my project and so forth. Now, of course, there's way more to Python than that. This is just part of the tour. Let me show you something else you might be interested in. Let me set this up. I'm going to rename this layer. I'm just going to call it roads. Okay, so I'm calling that roads. Now, if I go back over to ctemp in your data sets, there's a folder here called Python script. And I gave you a really basic Python script you can play around with or at least look at. And I'm going to open up Notepad++ and just take a look at this thing. Okay. And so this is designed to run a Python command where what it's going to do is take the name of a feature class from the table of contents called roads. It's going to write it out to the C temp directory, and it's going to do 3 buffers, one at 100 meters, another at 200, and a third at 300. And it's going to put it into what's called a loop, if you're not familiar with computer programming terms. And it's basically going to take the first 3 characters of what's coming from this list to create the file name. So this is, if you really, this is sort of the next step up from just doing straight command lines. So if I were to go back over here, right click and do load code and browse to my C temp directory where I have my data sets, and go to the Python script and load that up. So you can see now how it puts that whole script kind of in the stuff above it. And that's really where the power of Python is going to come in, especially in the desktop environment, is, everything's loaded in and you basically just hit enter to get it up and running. So let's do that. So there's that code, and I'll hit enter to run it. And so it's giving me feedback. There's the 100, the 200, and the 300. And there they all are that just got added. So think about the power of that, right? I could have done that by clicking buttons through the GUI, but I wrote a Python script with a loop, and I just looped through what I wanted. I got 3 different buffers without dissolve, but they're all right on top of each other, and so forth. If I go back over behind the scenes here, there's all the files that just got written out because of my command. If you look at the code closer, you'll see the logic that went into the naming of the files and so forth. Okay, so that's a little taste introduction to Python inside of ArcGIS Pro. It's really cool stuff if you like coding, and I encourage you to look into that more. Let me show you another cool thing. They're called models. Let me clean up my map a little bit here. You can basically highlight layers, right click, and just remove them out of there, just so, because you can see how it gets kind of busy. And I'll close the Python window. And so I go here to Model Builder. So these are what are called geoprocessing models. In some sense, this is a way, if you're interested in the ideas of coding, computational thinking, you can use models to do similar to what I showed in Python. And what you can do with this is, right now you don't really see anything, but the way the model works is you can take, back at geoprocessing, I can drag and drop tools into a blank canvas, right? And let's say I want to do a workflow of, I want to buffer some roads and then do another command called clip around wetlands, right? I want to know perhaps where roads may be impacting the wetlands. So I dragged buffer over, and I'm going to right click and open it up. And this is where I kind of program it, right? So I'm going to tell it to take the roads, those major roads, and let's say 1,000 feet, and I will dissolve these ones. And when I hit OK, watch what's going to happen to these after when I hit OK. Okay, so now it's programmed. Oh, sorry, now I've armed it, right? It's ready to go. So here's the input, here's the command, there's the output. Okay. Now there's another command. It's called clip, and I want to use clip, so I can search for it, I can drag it, I can drop it onto the canvas here. Now clip also has inputs and outputs. And in this case, I want to think of clip like a cookie cutter, right? So with a cookie, you've got dough, and then you've got a shape you're clipping out. And so in this case, The cookie cutter is going to be this roads buffer, and the dough is going to be the wetlands. And so the ways I can connect these two together, I can click on roads buffer and see how a line is forming, and I can go to clip, and when I release, I'm making that the clip feature. And then if I right click on the command itself and open it up, and it's always good to look at the help on these things, just so you make sure you know what you're getting, right? So my road is my clip feature, my wetlands is my input, and this is what the clip will do. Okay, so the input feature in this case will be the Monroe County wetlands, and I'll just take the default, and boom, I've got my first model going, right? So first I'll buffer, then I'll take that buffer and send it into clip, and I'll get a final wetlands from it. And again, models, another big topic here. There's a lot you can do. You can right click on those models, make sure it adds it to the display, and so forth. I can save it, and I'll validate it. It's kind of like compiling code. And when I go and run it, let me set this up so you can see how this works. This is probably a good example, even right here. That's my selection. Okay, so I'm going to be interested in, I'm going to buffer this line here, and I'm interested in parts of the wetlands that are going to be clipped out from that. So if I go back over to analysis, to my model, to my model, and then again, like I said in the beginning of the video, as I click on things, notice how the menus change, right? So for model, when I clicked on that, I want to run it. You can see things were happening. Okay. When you learn more about models, the shadows mean that the process ran. If I go back over to the map, you can see there's the name of my output feature class that got created. I'll change the color to make it look a little, make it kind of stand out a little more. And you don't see the buffer, but these were, if you go back behind the scenes and you look in your default geodatabase, that was created by the model, right? It doesn't put it in the map. So it created a buffer of that road, took that buffer, and then found through clip parts of the wetlands that were within that 1,000 foot buffer. And so that's the idea of a model. And then another cool thing with a model is you can now export it to a Python file. So if you want to start trying to program without really writing code, you can do a model, export it out, save it, model.py. And then when I go back to ctemp, here's model.py, right? As it says, generated by the model builder, but there's the code. There's the ArcPy code. So when I teach programming as its own topic, I typically start students with this approach because it's, especially if you don't have a background in coding, this is a nice gentle way to introduce yourself. So that's the exciting world of Python and building models. All right. For the last part of this demo, I want to show you just some kind of special topic stuff. I'm not going to have time, of course, to show you every possible thing about ArcGIS Pro. There would almost be a lifetime of that, but some kind of just cool stuff to make you aware of. A big part of ArcGIS Pro now is the integration with three-dimensional data. And let's take a look at that. And for that one, I'm going to go back to my data sets I gave you. And I'm going to go in the file geodatabase. And I'm going to grab this one in, Monroe County Buildings. And I'm going to put that in. Okay. And let's take a look at that. And what this is are OpenStreetMap buildings that I added some additional information in for this example. And right now, you know, they're buildings, right? If I turn the, if I change my base map, You know, this is downtown Rochester, New York. You can kind of see, they kind of match up. Good enough for our purposes. But I want to make, let's say I want to make these three-dimensional, right? And so a really cool part of ArcGIS Pro is what they call the scenes. So right now I'm in a 2D map, but if I go here to insert new map and I click the little button of the drop down and I'll do a new local scene. Okay, now I've got 3-dimensional layers and 2-dimensional layers. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my map. I'm going to right click and do copy. I'm going to bring those over to my scene and I'm going to paste that in. Okay. So if I hold my mouse wheel down and then I see how the cursor changes and I push forward, I get a 3-dimensional kind of interaction. There's Lake Ontario off in the background, and I'm sort of in 3D here now because it's a scene. And what you can do, if I look at the attributes of this data layer, the buildings, you can see one of my attributes I have are stories, or the height of the buildings. So what I'm going to do now is create a pseudo 3-dimensional representation using the values of the stories field. And to do that, I'm going to first move the layer into 3D layers. Then I click up here under Feature Layer Appearance with a submenu, and I'll just select Base Height, and the field I want is Stories. And you can see now how I've got a 3-dimensional representation. It basically took the number value to use that to then kind of extrude out the geometries here. And it's kind of a cool way. And of course, this is another big topic, 3-dimensional. There's a lot more you can do with it. But again, I'm just trying to show you what's possible with ArcGIS Pro to hopefully get you excited about learning more about it yourself. And of course, if you can do that, other cool things they have in ArcGIS Pro are animations. So to do a basic animation, if you go up here to the View tab, it's kind of hidden right now, but right here it says animation. If I click on that, if you're familiar with animation tools, they often use a timeline. And keyframes, which are basically points along in the animation. And it's relatively easy to get started. You basically take snapshots along the way and it interpolates. So let's say I start here and then I zoom in a little bit and I'll create another keyframe. And I can kind of fly down the street here. And then I'll pull back out. And so forth. And you can tweak this a lot. So if I just play it, you can see how I'm animating the scene. And that can be really, really powerful for showing people a study area and so forth. There's also ways to map change over time and so forth, but I just want to show you that animation. And of course you can export this out. In one of my other videos, if you watch the just general introduction to GIS, I actually use that for the little scene about animation, but this is how you actually do it with ArcGIS Pro. Okay, lastly, I want to go over something kind of specialized, but a lot of my students are always really interested in this topic, so I thought it'd be important to mention it in this kind of tour of ArcGIS Pro video, and those are transportation networks. I have a lot of students that are very interested in the routing of goods and services and environmental impacts of transportation. So if you're watching this video and that's something of interest to you, let me just give you a quick demonstration of that. If you look at the data sets I gave you, there's my catalog pane. There's a folder in there called Network Datasets. And what you'll see in this folder They look similar to the other things, but they're slightly different. Monroe County Roads Network ND, Network Dataset. And notice how the icon is different. So with that, if you drag that over to your map, and this shows the whole county. It's based on a shapefile, but it's got special properties to it that can model transportation, like routing, connections between what are called the edges, the different line segments. And so in this hypothetical scenario, I'm going to bring this other one called route stops. And I'll zoom to that layer. And I'll click just to make it a little easier to see. Okay, so let's pretend that this is a scenario, because I am a college professor. This is my university where I work, and this is a mall nearby, and this is a park. So let's say that we want to come up with a transportation plan for college students so they can get off campus on the weekend and they don't have cars. They want to leave campus, they want to go to the mall, and then they want to go hang out in a park to have some relaxation time. And we want to figure out the best route to do that, okay? And network data sets can allow that. And so these are my stops. And so when I click on that layer, if I go under here where it says analysis, another good example of how clicking on the various tabs changes things. Right here I've got new network analysis layer, and this is how Esri does their networks. And I want to do a route. There's other things. I don't have time, of course, to go into all of these. I'll just show you a really basic route. But it's going to create a special analysis layer that's designed for transportation. Where am I going to stop? But also where there might be barriers. Maybe there's routing I need to do and there's something getting in the way. Okay. And on the submenu, if I click on route, you can see here I need to import the stop. So if I'm going to route from point A to point B to point C, where is it I want to stop? So when I click on import stops, and my input locations are going to be the route stops, and that's going to load that into that analysis layer, and I'll run that. And when that happens, you should see where it says stops. You can see it's working on the file right now. Okay. Notice how the icons change: 1, 2, and 3. So stops 1, 2, and 3. And then now to run the route, to actually do it, all I have to do here is click this run button for the analysis, solve the route. So get me to those 3 points in the quickest way, or perhaps by time or other things. Again, huge topic, just trying to show you that it's out there and the possibilities that exist. And this purple line comes up that shows my route, right? So it ran through my transportation network, gave me a route. And if I wanted to, I could put a barrier. So this is kind of a busy road. Let's say that there's a traffic accident. If I clicked here on line barrier and then created it, and I'll have other videos, by the way, on how to create vector data. But let's say I'll take and just create put a line barrier out. Okay, so you see that red line now is a line barrier. And if I go back to the route and run it, watch what will happen to the purple line. You can see how, because of the barrier, it rerouted around it, okay? And that's a really powerful feature of, at least for networks, being able to go around obstacles. I do a lot of work on disaster management and so forth, and that can be really helpful and so forth. So take a look at Network Analyst if transportation and so forth is something you're interested in. That's it for the demo. It went a lot longer than I thought, but I'm really excited about what's possible with the software, and I'm even more excited about what you can learn about with the software. So I showed you a lot of things, a lot of possibilities. It is a complicated software package, but I think like anything, the more that you work with it, you'll get to sort of think how it thinks, and I think it'll open up a lot of possibilities for you. Thanks a lot. In this video, you were given a tour of the ArcGIS Pro software environment. You should now have an understanding of the basic features of ArcGIS Pro that include logging into the software using your ArcGIS Online account, core software interface elements that include the map, the table of contents, and the various tabs and ribbon buttons, data management using ArcCatalog, data display using Symbology, various forms of attribute and interactive selections, as well as basic querying, how to find and use geoprocessing tools, how to get started with layouts and making a map, how to use command line and external scripts with Python, how to build a basic model, and I also covered some special topics just to get you excited about what's possible with ArcGIS Pro. This includes three-dimensional data, animation, and working with transportation networks. After watching this video, I hope you have a good understanding of the possibilities that exist with ArcGIS Pro software. I encourage you to go and try ArcGIS Pro or other GIS software packages that exist so you can start to unlock the power of spatial analysis, mapping, and spatial thinking that geographic information systems or GIS can provide. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to this channel to keep updated on new videos, share these videos, hit the like button, or provide any comments or feedbacks or questions you may have. Thanks for watching.